Hi, I'm Nova. My own parents looked me in the eye on a crowded plane and said I looked homeless, told me not to sit near them, like I was some kind of shame. My mother smirked, mocked me for starring in a sci-fi movie, and the whole cabin laughed like it was the joke of the year. Do you know what it feels like when strangers join your family in humiliating you? When you want to disappear, but you can't. But here's what none of them knew. 20 minutes later, every single one of those people, all 216 of them, would owe me their lives. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, and ask yourself, what would you have done in my place? I could feel it before I even reached the row, those stares. You know the ones, a quick glance up, then down, silently assessing you like you don't belong. I tugged at the sleeves of my old hoodie, its cuffs frayed from years of use, and clutched my notebook tighter against my chest. It was the same notebook I've carried since college. Its cover scuffed, pages worn thin from years of writing thoughts I didn't dare say out loud. I kept my head low as I moved through the business class cabin, feeling every pair of eyes as if they were weights pressing on my shoulders. Mom, Marcella, was impossible to miss, perfectly put together as always. Her blonde hair fell just so, not a strand out of place, her pearl earrings catching the light as if they were mocking me, too. Next to her was Rex, my brother, sprawled out like he owned the plane, scrolling through his phone with that permanent smirk he's perfected since high school. When he spotted me, he didn't bother hiding his look of disgust. Finally, Mom said, her voice loud enough for everyone in a 5-row radius to hear. I was wondering if they'd let someone dressed like that into business class. You look homeless, Nova. Could you at least try to look presentable when you're flying with us? It felt like my stomach dropped to my knees. A ripple of soft chuckles came from nearby passengers. I froze for half a second, unsure if I'd heard her right, or maybe hoping I hadn't. I opened my mouth to reply, but Rex jumped in before I could. Honestly, Mom, he said, loud and theatrical, don't you think she's going for a look? You know, like those low-budget sci-fi movies where the lead character's trying to look edgy but just looks tragic? He grinned and leaned back, clearly proud of himself. I heard someone snicker behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, a teenager across the aisle pulled out his phone and angled it toward me, whispering to his friend. This is going on TikTok, he muttered, not even trying to hide it. I wanted to disappear. No, I wanted to scream. But instead I stood there, frozen, gripping my notebook so hard I thought the spiral binding would snap. My jaw clenched. My throat tightened. Don't give them more to laugh at, I told myself. Not here. Not now. Are you going to stand there all day? Mom said sharply, gesturing to the empty seat near them. Or do you need me to ask the flight attendant to get you a map? Another chuckle from somewhere behind us. I walked to my seat, her seat really. She'd booked it. I wasn't worth my own booking, apparently, and sat down without saying a word. Goodness, Mom continued, as if I wasn't sitting right next to her. The least you could do is sit far enough away not to embarrass us. But I suppose it's too late for that. I stared at my notebook. Endure. For now. I wrote it slowly, pressing hard into the paper. The only thing that kept me from falling apart in moments like this was knowing I could still write, still turn pain into words, even if those words stayed locked in this notebook forever. The flight attendant stopped by, offering drinks. I managed to find my voice long enough to ask if there were any other available seats. She apologized politely, full flight. Mom smirked at me like she'd won something. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I kept my eyes forward, my hand resting on my notebook, holding onto it like a lifeline. As the plane taxied down the runway, I turned toward the window, watching the lights of Chicago blur into streaks as we lifted off. My reflection stared back at me, hair pulled into a simple bun, no makeup, clothes that screamed out of place among this crowd. I didn't look like someone who once... Well, it didn't matter. Not to them. They think I'm nothing, I whispered so softly even I barely heard it. But they don't know who I used to be. They think I'm nothing. They don't know who I used to be. I leaned my head back against the seat and stared at the overhead vent, letting the hum of the cabin drown out my mother's voice. But then, a sound sharper than all the others cut through. Laughter. Not the casual, passing kind, the sort that's aimed like a dart. I turned my head slightly and saw him, the same teenager across the aisle, holding his phone at just the right angle to capture me. His friend peeked over his shoulder, whispering something, before they both laughed. "The internet's loving this," he said, just loud enough for me to hear. "She's trending already." Trending. I bit the inside of my cheek. I didn't need to see the comments to know exactly what they said. I adjusted my glasses and focused on the notebook in my lap, tracing the worn edge of its cover with my thumb. They wanted a reaction. They weren't going to get one. "See?" a well-dressed woman in the next row said loudly to a flight attendant, gesturing toward me. "This is what happens when you let anyone into business class. It ruins the experience for everyone." She didn't even bother lowering her voice. The attendant gave an awkward smile and muttered something about policy, but the damage was done. I caught the way two men across the aisle glanced at me and nodded as if agreeing with her, the kind of nod that said I was an outsider who didn't belong in their world. Marcella didn't miss her chance to pile on. "Well," she said, dramatically adjusting her scarf, "at least she's finally the center of attention. Isn't that what you always wanted, Nova?" Her voice carried like it always did, polished, theatrical, just enough venom to sting. Rex chuckled and tilted his phone slightly, pretending to scroll while his camera lens faced me. "Mom, let her have her moment," he said, grinning. "She looks like she's about to cry." "That'll get more likes." I gripped my pen tighter, imagining how easy it would be to jab it into the smug look on his face. Instead, I wrote a single word in my notebook. Breathe. The cabin was buzzing, snippets of whispers, quick laughs, and that low hum of judgment I knew too well. It felt like every pair of eyes in business class was on me. But then, suddenly, the tone shifted. The plane jolted hard, throwing Rex's drink into his lap. Overhead bins rattled violently, and the lights flickered. A cart clanged in the galley as a flight attendant stumbled to keep her balance. Gasps rippled through the cabin, followed by a child's shrill cry from somewhere in the back. "What in the world?" Marcella grabbed at her pearls, clutching them like they could keep the plane in the air. "This is unacceptable." "Great," Rex groaned, wiping at his stained pants. "I paid for business class, not a roller coaster." But I knew better. This wasn't turbulence from a passing cloud. My mind kicked into a quiet, practiced rhythm. Pitch feels off, left engine strain heavier, altitude drift, not standard crosswind. I didn't say it out loud, but I wrote the notations in my notebook, just like I'd been trained to do once upon a time. The flight attendants moved down the aisle quickly, securing carts and instructing passengers to buckle up. One of them paused at our row, checking if we were all right. Marcella immediately started berating her about spilled drinks and lack of service. The attendant nodded politely and hurried on. I flipped to a page in my notebook labeled Emergency, jotting down coordinates and details, keeping the page angled away from prying eyes. My hands were steady. I could feel the panic all around me, but I'd been here before, not here on this flight, but in worse places, in worse conditions. Another jolt rocked the cabin. Marcella let out a little scream and clutched Rex's arm. He was too busy shaking his phone, complaining about losing signal, to comfort her. I stared out the window, scanning the clouds, listening for the engine's rhythm. It didn't soothe me, but it told me what I needed to know. This wasn't random. Then the intercom cracked, static filling the cabin. The captain's voice came through, strained, almost breaking. "Night Viper 9. If you can still hear us, we need you in the cockpit." My pen froze mid-sentence. My breath caught in my throat. Night Viper 9. They weren't supposed to know that name anymore. The words hung in the air like a lightning strike. "Night Viper 9. If you can still hear us, we need you in the cockpit." My fingers went slack around the pen, and the notebook slid halfway off my lap before I caught it. My heart pounded in my ears. It had been 10 years since I'd heard anyone say that name. 10 years since I buried that part of myself. I thought it would stay buried forever. Marcella leaned toward Rex, her voice low but still carrying. Night Viper? What kind of ridiculous nickname is that? They must be desperate. Rex smirked, brushing at the still damp stain on his pants. What, are you some wannabe hero now? He tilted his phone to record me again. Go ahead, give them a little speech for the internet. It'll get views. I kept my eyes fixed on the seat back in front of me, forcing my hand to steady as I flipped my notebook open to a blank page. In neat, deliberate strokes, I wrote, "Stay calm. Not yet." The turbulence worsened, sending a few gasps through the cabin. The attendants were shouting over the rattle of the overhead bins, their voices clipped and urgent, but I couldn't focus on them. I was back there, back in Oregon, 10 years ago, smelling jet fuel and rain, standing in that echoing hangar with my career still intact, with my name still unsoiled. I could see the faces of my squad, younger versions of us, laughing, unbreakable. They used to call me fearless. Night Viper 9, they'd say. No one can touch her in the sky. And for a while, it was true. Then came the mission, the one they still call the Oregon Incident. We were scrambled for a routine patrol, but nothing about it was routine. A civilian plane had lost power in restricted airspace, drifting straight toward disaster. I could still hear the commander's order, hold position, do not engage. But I couldn't sit there and watch innocent people die. So I broke rank. I pushed my jet into the storm, nudged that crippled aircraft out of the dead zone, and guided them to safety. I saved every soul on that plane, and for that, they stripped me of everything. The tribunal was quick, cold, merciless. They called it insubordination. The media turned me into a scandal, a disgrace in uniform, and my family, my perfect, polished family, didn't lift a finger. I could still hear Marcella's words the day they revoked my wings. You've embarrassed us beyond repair. Do you even understand what you've done to our name? The weight of that memory squeezed my chest until I could barely breathe. Another jolt from the present brought me back, the cabin lurching hard enough that a drink cart crashed to the floor. I blinked, forcing the ghosts of the past to recede. The captain's voice came again, tighter now, cutting through static. Night Viper 9, if you can still hear us, we need you in the cockpit. They knew me. Somehow, someone up there knew exactly who I was. My hands trembled as I gripped the notebook. Part of me wanted to stay seated, to let them handle it, to keep my head down like I had for the last decade. But another part, the part that had saved that plane in Oregon, whispered that staying silent now would cost more than my pride. I drew in a sharp breath. They think I disappeared. But if I stay quiet, 216 people will. The whispers in the cabin had shifted. Is she actually somebody important? A man behind me murmured. The teenager with the phone lowered it, recognition flashing across his face. Wait, is she that pilot? From the news? Years ago? Marcella scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. She's no hero. Don't encourage her. I straightened my spine. Maybe I wasn't their idea of a hero anymore. Maybe I never would be. But I knew what I had to do. For the first time since we boarded, I stood up, feeling every pair of eyes on me. The notebook was steady in my hand. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Rex. I didn't owe them a thing anymore. But I owed those 216 souls my courage. I didn't owe my family a thing anymore. But I owed those 216 souls my courage. The aisle stretched ahead of me like a gauntlet, rows of faces turning as I moved forward. The cabin lights flickered again, turbulence giving everything a strange, jerky rhythm, even my own steps. I kept my notebook clutched tight, the familiar feel of its worn cover grounding me. Every instinct told me to keep walking, but the looks I got, sharp, suspicious, some openly hostile, reminded me that walking through them would be harder than facing any storm outside. I had made it halfway down when a man in a tailored navy suit stood abruptly, planting himself in the narrow aisle. He was tall, with silvering hair combed perfectly into place, the kind of man who probably lived on planes like this. His voice carried, loud enough for the cabin to hear. You're not qualified to be near that cockpit. he said, glaring at me like I was a trespasser.
Sit down before you get us all killed.
The words stung, not because I hadn't heard them before, but because I had, over and over, in different forms. You're not qualified. You're not good enough. You're not one of us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. A woman across the aisle shook her head in disapproval, and 2 passengers a few rows behind raised their phones, recording like they couldn't wait to post this. My humiliation was trending mid-air again, and then, from behind them, Marcella's voice, sharp, cutting, perfectly timed like a dagger slipping between my ribs. "Go ahead and play hero, Nova. Maybe you'll finally make yourself useful." I didn't turn to look at her. If I did, I wasn't sure if I'd laugh or explode. Instead, I drew in a breath and kept my gaze fixed on the man blocking me. "Sir," I said evenly, my voice calm but firm. "Please sit down. There's no time for this." He snorted, folding his arms. "Time for what?" "Pretending you're some big-shot pilot. We've all read the news. You're a disgrace. Stay in your seat and let the professionals handle it." The air felt tighter, the kind of suffocating tension that makes people bold in their cruelty. And then, a small voice. "Mom," a boy said, tugging at his mother's sleeve. He couldn't have been more than 7. "Why does nobody like her?" The question sliced through the noise. Silence fell over our section like someone had hit pause. Even the businessman blinked, caught off guard. His son's wide eyes were on me, genuine curiosity in them, none of the judgment I saw in the adults. I crouched so we were eye level. "Sometimes," I said softly, "people forget to see the whole story." He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. The innocence in that exchange burned hotter than any insult. For a moment, I wasn't Nova the scandal. I was just a person in front of a child, trying to tell the truth without giving away how badly my hands shook. The boy's mother looked away, embarrassed. Behind me, an older man muttered, almost to himself, "At least let her try. What do we have to lose?" A few others nodded, whispering among themselves. The tide wasn't turning fully, but the current had shifted. I stood, drawing in a steadying breath. Humiliation always seems louder than courage, I thought. But that doesn't make it stronger. The plane jolted again, this time hard enough to rattle the overhead bins. A distant crash echoed from the galley, followed by the shrill cries of a baby in the back. An oxygen mask dropped 2 rows behind me, dangling like a grim reminder of where this was heading. The businessman hesitated, his grip on the armrest loosening just slightly. That was all the space I needed. I stepped forward, brushing past him before he could recover. He didn't follow. The attendants had been clustered near the front, gripping the seatbacks for balance. One of them, a woman with streaks of gray in her bun and the kind of authority that came from years of this work, stepped forward. Her name tag read, Cindy. "Miss," she said, her tone firm, but not unkind. "Are you Nova Knox?" I nodded. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath this whole flight. "Captain Hayes has requested you personally. Go. I'll clear the aisle." That was it. No more debating. No more jeering. I walked the last few steps, the carpet under my feet vibrating with every tremor of the plane. I reached the cockpit door and wrapped my fingers around the handle. Muffled voices on the other side bled through, clipped, panicked, desperate. If I walked in, there was no turning back, for them or for me. The door felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was my own hesitation pressing down on me, or the memories clawing their way up as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with heat and tension, the low hum of the engines undercut by the shrill ping of warnings and the occasional barked command between the crew. The captain was slumped forward, sweat soaking through the collar of his uniform. He looked like a man holding back a dam with his bare hands. The co-pilot, younger, sharp-jawed, and clearly on edge, glanced back at me like I'd just walked in off the street. His voice cut through the cramped space. "Who even are you? You can't just walk in here." I met his stare without flinching. "Check the Oregon incident file," I said, steady but cold. "I'm Night Viper 9. For a beat, there was silence. Then the captain's head jerked toward me, his bloodshot eyes widening. "My God," he whispered, recognition dawning. "I thought you disappeared." "Not yet," I replied. He straightened, urgency replacing his shock.
Take the right seat.
It wasn't a request. The co-pilot, Jordan, his name tag read, snapped, "Captain, this is insane. She's a civilian liability." The captain cut him off. "She's not a civilian. She's Night Viper 9. You don't know what that means. Then keep quiet and do your job." Jordan bit his tongue, but didn't hide his glare as I slid into his seat. The feel of the controls beneath my hands sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me, comfort and terror twisted together. It had been years since I'd sat here, and yet my fingers found their place like they never left. I opened my notebook briefly, running my eyes over the coordinates and calculations I'd jotted down. It wasn't for them, it was for me, a grounding ritual. Breathe, focus. Don't let them see your doubt. Scanning the instruments, I noticed it almost immediately. The pitch readings didn't match the feel of the plane. My gut told me the truth before my mind caught up. "These numbers are off," I said. The captain glanced over. "What do you mean, off?" "Pitch is feeding false data. 800 feet difference, maybe more. You've been flying blind." Jordan scoffed. "That's impossible. The diagnostics are lying," I snapped. "Cross-check with the standby." The captain's fingers flew over the controls, verifying it. His expression hardened. "She's right." I didn't let the moment hang. "We need to recalibrate manually and redistribute thrust. You've been compensating in the wrong direction. It's why the turbulence feels worse than it should." Jordan opened his mouth to argue, but the captain silenced him with a raised hand. "Do it." My hands moved on instinct, adjusting altitude, redistributing thrust, recalibrating pitch. Every turn of the yoke, every flick of a switch brought muscle memory roaring back. I wasn't the washed-up disgrace they whispered about in the cabin. I was the woman who'd once disobeyed a direct order to save a plane full of strangers, and I'd do it again without blinking. Through the open door, I caught a glimpse of Marcella, still in her seat. She shook her head slowly, lips pursed in that familiar expression of disgust. It hit me like a punch. My family hadn't seen me for who I was in over a decade. They only saw the shame they chose to believe. This plane isn't the only thing that's been flying blind, I thought. But my focus snapped back as a sharp warning alarm blared. "Altitude's dropping!" Jordan shouted. Before I could respond, the plane jolted violently, throwing us against our restraints. The yoke jerked like it had a mind of its own. Alarms screamed louder, and the captain's voice cut through the chaos. "It's now or never!" I gripped the controls with both hands. The yoke fought against me, but I wasn't about to let go. Every muscle in my arms burned as I gripped the controls, the storm battering us like it wanted to peel the wings off the plane. The captain was shouting altitude readings, his voice straining to stay steady, while Jordan muttered under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they weren't compliments. I tuned them both out. "Cut autopilot," I ordered. Jordan turned toward me, disbelief written all over his face. "Are you insane? In this?" "Trust me," I said, eyes fixed on the altimeter. He looked to the captain for backup, but the older man gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it." The click of the autopilot disengaging sent a strange sense of calm through me. The plane was mine now, unpredictable, furious, alive. I banked hard to the left, threading us between two massive storm cells, the plane groaning under the stress. Oxygen masks dropped. Screams echoed from the cabin, a sharp chorus of panic that stabbed through the roar of the engines. "Easy!" Jordan barked, clutching the side panel. I didn't answer. My mind went quiet in the way it always used to on missions. There's a rhythm to chaos if you know how to listen. "Steady on," the captain murmured, though I could hear the awe creeping into his voice. Through the half-open cockpit door, I caught the shrillest sound of all. My mother... She's going to kill us! She's reckless! I like Oregon all over again!" Her words cut through the storm louder than any thunderclap. For a moment, I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Even now, when her life literally hung on my ability to keep this plane in the air, she'd rather see me fail than admit I could save her. Gasps rippled through the cabin as her words spread like wildfire. I could almost feel the passengers' eyes boring into my back, some siding with her out of fear, others frozen in uncertainty. "Reckless," she'd said, the same word they'd used at my tribunal all those years ago. Reckless disregard for authority. They'd stripped my wings with those words. They'd let me stand alone with my career in ashes while my family hid in silence. I swallowed hard, pushing the memory down where it belonged. Not now. The plane jolted violently, a sudden drop that made my stomach lurch. The captain barked a new set of numbers, but I was already ahead of him, compensating with a sharp climb, banking again. The fuselage creaked, protesting the maneuver, but it held. "Who taught you that?" Jordan asked, his voice cracking, part disbelief, part reluctant respect. "People who didn't like to crash," I shot back. Through the chaos, a hand appeared in my peripheral vision. A flight attendant, Cindy, if I remembered her name right, slipped a bottle of water onto the console. "We're counting on you," she whispered before disappearing back toward the cabin. I didn't take my eyes off the controls, but I felt the weight of her words. It was the first time anyone here, crew or passenger, had acknowledged me without contempt or suspicion. The instruments steadied slightly, though I knew it wouldn't last. We'd cleared one band of the storm, but fuel levels were critical. My mind calculated the math automatically. Distance to the nearest alternate airport, fuel burn, margin for error. We'd get one shot at a controlled descent. One. In the brief lull, my mother's words came back, sharp and ugly. Reckless. The tribunal's verdict. The humiliation that followed me like a shadow. This isn't just survival, I thought. This is redemption. Another jolt slammed the plane, and this one was worse. Overhead compartments popped open. A baby cried somewhere behind me. "Brace!" Jordan shouted, but his warning ended in a dull thud. He'd been thrown forward, his head connecting with the panel. He slumped over, unconscious. "Jordan's out!" the captain yelled, panic flashing in his voice. "Then it's just us," I said, gripping the yoke with both hands. I leaned into the storm as if I could wrestle it into submission, every ounce of training and instinct flooding back like it had been waiting for this moment. The plane was mine, and so were their lives. With Jordan slumped over, unconscious, the cockpit felt even smaller. The captain and I locked eyes for just a moment. No words, just the silent understanding that I was in full command now. I unbuckled just long enough to help him pull Jordan from his seat, propping him against the wall, before strapping myself fully in. My fingers tightened around the yoke. "Set heading 042, I ordered. My voice came out steady, not the shaky whisper I half expected. "Reduce throttle by 5. We need to conserve fuel." The captain obeyed without question. That deference startled me more than the storm did. He glanced at me, shaking his head slightly. "You're flying better than anyone I've seen in decades." I didn't look up. "Because I've already lost once," I said quietly. "I won't lose again." The words weren't for him. They were for me. The tribunal's verdict echoed in my head. Disgrace, reckless, unfit. They'd carved those words into me like a brand. And yet here I was, hands on a jetliner's controls, steadying 216 souls in a sky that wanted to rip us apart. A crash of thunder shook the fuselage, a reminder that the storm wasn't letting go. Beyond the nose of the aircraft, the clouds churned, flashing with violent bursts of light. Through the partially open door, I could hear the cabin, crying, praying, a wave of human fear rising and falling with each jolt. And then I heard her, Marcella. My mother's voice was raw, unguarded in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. "Get her out of there," she sobbed to someone, probably a flight attendant. "Please, she can't do this. She'll get us all killed." The words landed differently this time. They weren't barbed like usual. They sounded desperate. For a fraction of a second, my grip loosened, not because of her contempt, I could handle that, but because I heard something else underneath it. Guilt. She was terrified, yes, but she was also mourning something. Maybe the years she spent pretending I didn't exist. I blinked hard and forced my attention back to the instruments. Altitude holding at 29,000, the captain reported, but Tokyo says the weather's closing in. We've got one corridor open for descent. How much fuel? He checked. Enough to make Tokyo if we start down in the next 10 minutes. Any delay, and we'll have to divert. But there's nowhere close. I took a breath, weighing it all. Steep descent through a narrow gap in a storm. One shot. That was it. I touched my notebook, lying on the panel beside me. My hand was steady now. It had been years since I opened it without feeling shame. I remembered writing in it after the tribunal, my handwriting jagged with humiliation as I tried to make sense of losing everything. But I wasn't writing apologies anymore. They'll remember me for this, I told myself silently. Not as the disgrace on trial, as the pilot who brought them home. I tightened my harness and leaned into the yoke. We're starting descent, I announced. Get me a reading on that corridor and tell Tokyo to clear it. I'll take it from here. The captain nodded, and for the first time, I saw relief flicker in his expression. The storm raged, but I didn't see it as a trap anymore. It was a challenge, one I intended to win. Then, just as I settled into that resolve, the radio crackled. Flight 209, this is FAA control. You are ordered to relinquish command to the licensed crew immediately. Failure to comply will result in legal action. The captain's head whipped toward me. They could take my license, they could take my freedom, but they weren't taking this plane from me. I pushed the transmit button on the radio and spoke clearly, each word sharp as steel. FAA control, this is Flight 209. If you want protocol, you can have it after landing. Right now, I'm keeping 216 people alive. That's my only priority. The radio hissed back with static before a clipped voice responded. Nova James, you are not authorized to operate this aircraft. You will face immediate arrest if you continue to interfere. The captain shot me a nervous glance, his hands frozen over the throttle. He was torn. I could see it. The veteran in him respecting the chain of command, but the human in him knowing I was their only chance. I didn't let him dwell on it. Then they can arrest me on the ground, I said, never taking my eyes off the storm ahead. But first, I'm landing this plane alive. He nodded slowly, then placed his hand firmly over mine on the yoke. You're in command, Night Viper. I've got your back. The storm outside had shifted from chaos to something almost living. Walls of gray and white closing in, with angry flashes of lightning searing the sky. Every muscle in my body ached from the tension of holding the controls, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. The descent corridor Tokyo had given us was narrow, a thread between two massive storm cells. One miscalculation, and we'd be headlines. The disgraced pilot who finally proved everyone right. Not today. They took my name, I thought, muscles straining as I corrected our pitch. They buried my career, but they won't bury me today. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the hum of the engines and the storm. A scream. Through the partially open cockpit door, I caught sight of my mother barreling down the aisle. Her pristine designer blouse was wrinkled, her hair undone from panic. "Stop her!" she shrieked at anyone who would listen. "She's going to kill us all! Do you people even know who she is?" Her voice clawed at me, threatening to drag me back to every tribunal, every dinner table where she'd looked at me like I'd ruined her life. But then something unexpected happened. Two passengers, a middle-aged man in a business suit and a young woman still clutching her oxygen mask, stepped into the aisle, blocking her path. "Ma'am, sit down," the man said firmly. "She's the only one who looks like she knows what she's doing." Marcella froze, stunned. "She's dangerous," she spat back, but her words didn't carry the same venom. They sounded broken. The young woman shook her head. "She's saving us. Let her do it." The flight attendant, Cindy, wrapped her arms around my mother, guiding her gently but firmly back to her seat. For the first time in my life, strangers defended me against her. Her voice still echoed in my ears, pleading and desperate, but it didn't pierce me like before. I whispered to myself, so low only I could hear, "This isn't about you anymore." The instruments blared as we approached the final wall of the storm. I needed to bring us down fast. "Hold on," I told the captain. "We're going nose down." He didn't argue. I took a breath, adjusted the controls, and dove. The plane pitched sharply, screams erupting from the cabin. Oxygen masks swung wildly, overhead bins rattling like dice in a cup. For a terrifying moment, the storm swallowed us whole. Darkness, wind, and the relentless fight of metal against nature. And then, just as quickly as it began, we broke through. Sunlight. The sky ahead was a pale, calm blue, the kind that almost felt insulting after everything we'd just endured. The cabin fell silent, stunned by the sudden serenity. My breath shook as I reached for my notebook, flipping to a blank page. My hand didn't tremble this time. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Not a disgrace, a survivor. Just as I let myself feel the relief of clearing the storm, alarms blared. "Engine 2 just failed," the captain said grimly. Through the windshield I could see it, the Tokyo runway, faint in the distance. This was it, the landing they'd remember, or the one they'd never walk away from. The Tokyo runway was a thin gray ribbon in the distance, barely visible through the mist and scattered clouds. My hands felt welded to the yoke, my palms damp but steady. The plane hummed unevenly, that failed engine throwing everything off balance. Every shudder of the fuselage felt like a reminder. There was no margin for error. "Flaps at 30, I ordered. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't even sound like me. It sounded like the person I used to be, before the tribunal, before my family decided my name was synonymous with failure. "Yes, ma'am," the captain responded without hesitation. He'd stopped second-guessing me hours ago. The nose dipped slightly as I adjusted our descent. "No tribunal," I told myself. "No Marcella, just the runway." The cockpit was eerily quiet, aside from the low growl of the surviving engine and the hiss of the air system. My focus tunneled in. Instruments, horizon, speed. Every correction I made was deliberate, every calculation replayed twice in my mind. The wheels hit the runway with a jarring thud, harder than I wanted but still controlled. The plane wobbled, but I held it steady, easing it down like a wounded bird finally finding its nest. The reverse thrusters roared, and we slowed, painfully, agonizingly, until the screeching of the tires softened into a rolling hum. Then came the sound I wasn't prepared for, applause. It started in the front, a hesitant clap or two, then grew into a wave of cheers and relief. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, my chest heavy with the release of every fear I'd been holding back. We taxied to a stop on the tarmac, where a cluster of FAA agents waited. Their dark uniforms made them look more like hunters than officials. My stomach knotted as I unbuckled. So this is how it ends, I thought. Saved them all, only to be dragged away in cuffs. As soon as the cabin door opened, 2 agents stepped forward. "Nova James," one of them called. "You're coming with us." Before I could answer, the captain stepped between us, his voice ringing out across the cabin and into the jet bridge. "This woman saved your lives, all of them. You'll be shaking her hand before you take her in cuffs." Passengers murmured their agreement, some clapping again, others voicing their gratitude. The agents faltered. They weren't prepared for a public defense. After a tense pause, they backed down, muttering something about further review. For once, I didn't feel small. Later, at baggage claim, Marcella found me. She looked disheveled, mascara smudged, hair frizzy from hours of panic. She stopped a few feet away, her voice sharp but weaker than usual. "You only proved you're reckless," she said, like she needed those words to protect her from the truth. I didn't take the bait. I adjusted the strap of my bag, met her eyes briefly, and said, "And yet, You're alive to say it. Then I walked away, leaving her standing there with nothing to cling to. As I headed for the exit, I felt a small hand tug my sleeve. It was the young mother from earlier, her little girl peeking out from behind her leg. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "You saved us," she said softly. "You saved her." The girl whispered, almost shyly, "You're my hero." Something in me cracked, but not in a bad way. I knelt down, handed her my old notebook, its pages worn from years of being my lifeline. "For you," I said. "Fill it with braver words than I ever could." She hugged it to her chest like it was a treasure. Outside, the Tokyo night air hit me like a blessing, cool, sharp, cleansing. I walked out of the terminal with just my bag. The notebook was gone, but I didn't need it anymore. They can erase my name from their records, I thought, but not from the sky. That's where I've always belonged. They humiliated me at 30,000 feet, but 20 minutes later, I was the only reason they were alive.